Well, welcome to Mixed Methods Research and Overview. I'm Joe Gaugler, long-term care professor in nursing and director of graduate studies in the Center on Aging here at the University of Minnesota. And now we're turning to part two of our overview of mixed methods and really trying to answer the question, why use mixed methods? In what circumstances or situations would mixed methods best be applied? And again, much of this material is derived from the overview of best practices for mixed methods research in health sciences, published by Cresswell and colleagues in 2010. So here I am providing some rationales for why we would want to use or why we'd consider using mixed methods. And building off of the 2010 publication, I'm providing some additional background based on Cresswell and Plano-Clark's 2011 text as well. And let's work through each of these. First, a need exists because one data source may be insufficient. So there may be cases where, for whatever reasons and based on the question an investigator has, that simply utilizing a purely quantitative empirical method may not get at issues related to process or issues related to how or why something is working or issues related to context. Vice versa, qualitative strands may not be able to provide sufficient information as to, say, replicability, issues related to effectiveness or efficacy, issues related to, say, patterns of findings and results, et cetera. And there are many other probably justifications we can use to determine and identify why, say, one type of method or methodology isn't necessarily sufficient. If that's the case, then the rationale for mixed methods is made clear. Second, a need exists to explain initial results. And again, I think this is another powerful rationale for why one would want to conduct mixed methods. It could be, for example, say I conduct a randomized control trial, and for whatever reasons, my intervention doesn't show any effectiveness or efficacy. Well, why is that? Now, certainly I could maybe look at some key variables within the randomized control design that I had collected that could potentially explain lack of benefit. But there may be also a need to actually ask people who participated, why didn't this work for you? What were the reasons why? And that certainly could identify additional reasons as to why the intervention may or may not have worked, but then maybe even get at to issues related to mechanisms or processes of benefit or lack thereof too. So again, I mean, that could be one potential example for needing to explain initial results. Another reason as to why one would want to consider using mixed methods is to generalize exploratory findings. So again, say one starting with a focus group, one is utilizing some type of qualitative method in the field, and maybe starts to identify really intriguing patterns. For example, I'm working with a colleague, Tatiana Shippey, in the School of Public Health here at the University of Minnesota, and she's doing a really interesting, complex mixed method study on health disparities and health equity in nursing homes in Minnesota and throughout the U.S. And so she began by doing some really in-depth interviewing of residents. And one thing she's found that's been very interesting, and she's focused particularly her interviewing on those of diverse ethnic or racial origin in these nursing homes. And one of the things she's found that's been very interesting, that really has run counter to some of the empirical research I've done myself, is she's noted that many of these residents have no visiting family members. No family members are visiting them at all or anything along those lines. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do in subsequent empirical survey work is to really determine, is that the case? Is that actually occurring, that these residents, number one, don't have family members aren't visiting, and perhaps most importantly, is this lack of family engagement impacting overall quality of life or quality of care in these nursing homes that serve diverse populations? That to me is a good example of the need to explain initial results and why mixed methods is powerful. Now, certainly in some cases it may be the mixed methods design is not necessarily an a priori design, such as the case of Dr. Shippey's study. It may be we as investigators are in the field and conducting some type of study, again, utilizing, say, ethnographic methods, grounded theory, et cetera, and then the results we obtain then lead us to perhaps conduct some follow-up empirical/quantitative types of analyses or designs. That could be another example too of the need to explain initial results. And certainly it can be vice versa as well when conducting empirical quantitative research, say survey-related data, understanding why certain results emerged the way they did in an initial strand. Fourth here is, third, which is similar to the second, a need exists to generalize exploratory findings. I think it's similar to the second point. Again, when we're talking about exploratory findings, again, exploratory doesn't necessarily always mean qualitative. It can mean quantitative as well. But the need to utilize an additional method to perhaps explain what we have found in exploratory analyses. And maybe that also leads to the creation of, if this is what one is interested in, hypotheses per se. Fourth, a need exists to enhance a study with a second method. Similar to the first point, by utilizing this subsequent method or concurrent method, it more or less enhances the overall study and what the study will generate. Again, I really want to emphasize here, and we talked about this in the first module to some extent, is much of this should be driven by question. If the question requires or will be best addressed and answered by multiple methods, then that certainly is an instance and offers a strong rationale for an investigator to use mixed methods. Again, I don't think it's sufficient to simply say, well, it's basically adding one method to another, and by doing so, by adding both together, we'll automatically have something better. Or kind of falling to this, what I think is a somewhat lazy rationale in that qualitative and quantitative combined are better than one or the other. It's not necessarily the case, particularly, again, depending on one's question. A need exists to best employ a theoretical stance. Certain theories are very amenable to mixed methods, and in fact, maybe can best be tested, best can be understood in utilizing mixed methods to understand, for example, how certain constructs evolve, how certain constructs are related to each other. Again, I think that's a potentially strong rationale for why mixed methods can be used or required. Also, a need exists to understand a research study through multiple research phases. Certainly, there are many instances where one is engaged or involved in a large-scale type of initiative, say a large-scale program evaluation. And it may be required that in order to evaluate this given program, it's not going to happen within the context of a singular study. It actually will occur over multiple phases, maybe even multiple years, that then do require multiple methods to best understand, is this program working? Perhaps can this program best influence policy, etc. Again, in those cases, a use of a mixed methods design may be appropriate if not desired. We've alluded to this a little bit in the prior slide, but really, again, why do we use mixed methods? Being driven by the research question. And certainly there is divergence within the mixed methodological literature where some believe that sometimes the research question shouldn't necessarily drive the methods we employ. I think Cresswell certainly believes that is the case. I do as well. That one's question should be utilized to more or less, whether it's question, hypotheses, etc., that is what should be used to guide what one's methods are and what one's methodological framework is. There are many, many cases that I have experienced both myself, but then also when advising, say, graduate students or other fellow colleagues and scholars, where the question posed is not necessarily amenable to mixed methods, and that's fine. If mixed methods aren't required or needed, to be quite frank, it's probably advisable, in many cases is a good outcome, to not use them then. As opposed to saying, well, mixed methods are great, I'm very excited by doing that, and I'm going to do them regardless of what my question is or above and beyond what my question is. And in fact, the resources required to conduct mixed methods effectively, both in terms of people power, both in terms of time, and often cases financial resources, are such that if one can answer a question within a singular type of methodology or method, then that is probably the best outcome for all involved. Second, contextualize information or provide multi-level perspectives. So again, there are many instances where we can conduct multi-level research utilizing one type of method per se, or say a series of quantitative and or qualitative methods. But this is also usually an exciting opportunity to utilize mixed methods as well. Say one particular unit of analysis is the individual, and let's say the researcher chooses to apply a strictly quantitative approach when studying individual factors per se, but then the researcher may also be interested in gaining a better contextual understanding for where these individuals are part of, or what these individuals are part of. And those contextual analyses or those contextual methods may better align themselves with more of a qualitative approach, whether it's ethnography or something similar. So again, utilizing mixed methods as a way to better understand multiple levels of influence to answer a given question is another very strong rationale for why one would consider adopting this approach. The issue of triangulation, utilizing different methods to determine if similar patterns emerge, similar constructs are defined, regardless of method, utilizing triangulation to actually achieve that, or utilizing mixed methods to actually achieve effective triangulation. I mean, that's another potential good example for why one would want to use mixed methods. And then finally, understanding of process. Again, one is not necessarily precluded from understanding process if one utilizes either quantitative or qualitative methods solely. But sometimes applying, for example, qualitative methods to better understand the process of why or how a given intervention worked, for example, or why or how given statistical patterns are emerging in a quantitative strand can be another powerful reason for why one would want to use mixed methods. So again, in conclusion here to part 2, I wanted to refer you to 2 key readings that we've cited in these slides, particularly these 2 Cresswell readings. Cresswell's 2010 publication and then Cresswell's 2011 textbook. I found these very, very helpful, very foundational for me to better understand why one would want to use mixed methods.